Welcome to the world of damson plums. We are glad you are back with our format, Inside World Spirits. 2001, I would like to warmly welcome you. My name is Wolfram Ortner. I am a tour guide through the world of spirits. Today we will again focus on high-quality products. The topic is the Kriecherl. Andreas, welcome. And I will chat with him about the Kriecherl, although I'm not quite sure, is the Kriecherl actually blue or is it yellow?
Wolfgang Christi, thank you for the invitation. Hello. The Kriecherl can be both in appearance. However, it must be clearly stated that the Bavarian and Styrian grill, that is blue, it is frosted. It also has a matte character from the leaves. The yellow one, which many also refer to as Kriecherl, is actually more of a myropylane in terms of the correct botanical designation.
You live on a farm. I don't know exactly what you like, but if I'm not mistaken, you primarily make excellent distillates, but a lot is produced around you.
That's right. This is the latte, which we are making now. We have had the distillery for 25 years. It has really developed from a hobby into a passion and also into a business branch. We have a philosophy where we really only process regional fruit without purchasing from the tertiary hilly region. Otherwise, we also cultivate grassland on the farm. We are in a very hilly landscape, producing excellent horse hay, and the fields are normally planted with crops, grains, etc. And the other very interesting story on our farm is the area of the woman who has created a great name for herself with over 20 old tomato varieties, both as plants and fruits, along with eggplants and various others, cultivated here in the open field and in the greenhouse.
Speaking of which, can't you spell Academy correctly, or what is behind that?
What is the background in the Academy? Yes, we have protected this term for about 10 years. I am some kind of Francophile person, as the name Franzl might already suggest by its sound. And in French, there is the brand, the noble brand Oldiwi. On the farm, we also conduct many training sessions. 500 distillers have now been at our farm who have taken courses. The noble brand sommelier program that I initiated in Bavaria, together with the university in Weihenstephan, and thus the Academy, is a connection of both. I had already thought that it has to do with accord, which you don't do much anymore, but rather just the space. We have that in many areas, but it has a different context.
Since you are a very active person, and you like the whole Academy, and are involved with the sensory description of fruits, how would you now describe the typical Kriecherl or the perfect Kriecherl?
Okay, let's briefly go back to the fruit, because that usually also determines the sensory aspects or how a product tastes. The Kriecherl is a wild fruit, which means that a normal seed propagation has developed. Then the blue Kriecherl, the sea burnet, has been more specifically defined through selection. A wild fruit always has the character of wanting to propagate. The fruit set, in that sense, serves only as an attractant for a bird to carry the seed away from the area of the mother. This means that this fruit has a lot of stone, and I am allowed to and want to incorporate this stone into the whole typicity, into the taste of a Kriecherl. And stones also bring these tones of marzipan, these tones of bitter almond, these tones of dark chocolate, from a sensory perspective, which can certainly shape the style of the fruitiness that reminds of sloe, that reminds of plums, rounding off and accompanying the whole.
Before we check this sensorially, what you are telling me, because we won't let everything be told before I have tried it, I would still like to know what this has to do with the wild names, with Elsa's, myrobalans, and I don't know what else.
The myrobalan is not a wild name. It is Bruno's initiator, so it is really described here from a botanical perspective. The else is a different story. It is Prunus pedus, the bird cherry, which is described in our Bavarian folklore as else, and the neighboring village is Elsenbach. And that already explains the fruit, because a bird cherry is a very fresh fruit that needs the stream, which itself requires the shady side in the forest as a pioneer plant to develop.
That means the myrobalan is actually the grandfather of all these stone fruits in terms of DNA.
It should be more in the area of the sloe, around 2001. And what I also have about selection, the sloe as a small fruit, as a bitter fruit, which we also have here with the myrobalan at the grill, this bitterness, this tannin content, which has now developed through selection up to the large plum. This is certainly an intermediate stage between sloe and plum.
Patrick, everyone knows Bud Spencer and their silly movies. But I think it's about the same. It's like cinnamon and cloves. And today you brought us cinnamon in various forms.
Yes, this is cinnamon, basically how we know it, rolled. These are the outer parts of the bark, which are rolled while still moist and then dried. This results in the cinnamon sticks that are known. However, cinnamon sticks are difficult to process, which is why there are other forms. They are available grated or as pure powder. This has a larger surface area, making it easier to process during maceration. I am now talking about the distillation industry. It has a more definable weight and a larger surface area, and the active ingredients exchange better.
1000, where does cinnamon actually come from? From the East Asian region.
Yes, one knows Ceylon cinnamon, which is actually the slightly better cinnamon, and then cassia cinnamon. These are the two types that are roughly distinguished.
And is there only a price difference from the Asian region? Or also a qualitative difference?
Yes, there is a qualitative difference. Cassia cinnamon is somewhat more bitter and is therefore naturally used in spirit processing.
And since you are already talking about bitterness, where would you, think of our spice traffic light, use cinnamon?
Yes, classically in gin, it is a botanical. Almost every recipe contains gin to achieve some harmony. And as an aroma in the bitter, I would use it less for elixirs. That is very specific.
I can imagine it a little in elixirs, but you say it is very specific. When we are, to be honest, we can't imagine it. Are we in agreement on that?
No.
But then let's explain one thing. We are talking about spices and spirits. In what combination would you use it?
I can imagine it well as a perfume, so in the sweet area, and then together with a distillate. We have chosen a Kriecherl here, which works very well. In the parfait, it is not very dominant, but the harmony of the individual components comes out well.
Most of the time, I feel that when working or cooking with ginger, when cooking or working with cinnamon, the dosage is usually too high. But when cinnamon is very subtle, it is truly an excellent spice. Our world tour continues. It's nice that you were here again today. Let's see what you bring us next time.
I am also looking forward to it.
Thank you, Patrick. Usand. Mario, it's nice that you come to us from the Mosel and to beautiful Carinthia, to our distillery. But I believe they are eagerly interested in some questions about spirits, green gauges, whatever. Please start with your questions.
Yes, first of all, thank you and hello for the invitation. Yes, since I come from the Mosel and am currently training as a distiller, I am basically learning your profession. And that's why I have already listened briefly and have one or two questions regarding green gauges. Because for us in the Mosel, it is typical that we have the red vineyard for ourselves, which differs from the normal peach. And there are also some sensory differences. And I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that there are different green gauges, the red ones, the yellow ones, and the blue ones. Are there also such strong sensory differences? Or how can one distinguish a red from a yellow one?
Mario, hello, nice to see you. Interesting question. I bring both. And if you look at the descriptions with me, it says feminine for the grill and masculine for the myrobalan. And similarly, one can describe the characters here. I perceive them as finer, as sweeter people, if you put it that way. And The myrobalance in the masculine category, even when you eat the fruit, are quite astringent. The skin is hard, which you have to break through first. One could perhaps describe this as also relating to the type of man as one most commonly finds it. And that nicely explains the difference between these two fruits.
Mario, sorry for this philosophical answer. We will talk about Pulitzer in a high-minded way. Afterwards, please.
Yes, and then you also mentioned that the green gage is a very small fruit, which means it has a lot of stone. And that leads to my next question, because with peaches, we also have stones. And when we process them physically, we have many, let's say, problems with the stones if we leave them in, meaning we take them out directly to avoid getting that stone taste. How do you handle that with the green gages?
Now we are at another philosophical question, namely a burning philosophical question. How much stone can a fruit tolerate? And that is exactly the story that needs to be considered a bit in production. We do not remove the stones during fermentation. They stay in. The advantage is that the grill liquefies excellently by itself. Excuse me, do you not work with enzymes, or does the grill not work with enzymes? With quince, which is also a very well-known fruit from our distillery, here enzymes are mandatory, but we have a bit of a problem that they lead me towards the enzyme use. This is going into a lot of detail, but it is methanol on this topic when using enzymes that could become too high. That's why I only use enzymes where it really makes sense. From the fermentation technology and product perspective, I don't need any for the grill.
What is actually the enzyme?
The enzyme itself breaks down all the connections of the fruit, the cell connections, so that the fruit can evaporate or rather liquefy, and thus is better fermentable. It may also bring a slightly higher alcohol yield, but as mentioned, unfortunately, it has a slight tendency towards a higher methanol binding, which we cannot or should not have in our excellent distillates.
Mario, now I promise you one thing. With so much philosophy and so much technology, we need something liquid now. We will taste 3 creeping half. Yes, great. I'm looking forward to it. So gentlemen, one of the 3 Kriacherl is ready for tasting. First, we will try the aroma, and second, we will try the taste. Let's smell it. And I'll add to that, Andreas, since it's a dough scent, you describe it.
I begin to describe, as a producer, it is always difficult for me to evaluate my own product. So really perfect. That's why it's nice that you, as a great capacity, can accompany me. But as already mentioned, we also have a bit of this shelliness in here. However, we also clearly have these bitter almond tones.
But those are typical blue tones from the barn. You can really smell them. Can you relate to that?
Yes, absolutely.
It has, do you smell something there too? It has a super nice fruitiness. It's very fruity and is practically the stone fruit variety, typical for the Mirabelle.
That is a size.
We are now feminine. Excuse me.
That is typical. As I mentioned before, this integration of the stone into the sweetness of the fruit, that is simply what I expect from the Kriecherl. The tones, but also the dark tones with the addition of bitter chocolate, absolutely shape.
Very attractive product. Let's try it once. The taste. Approximately 6% or 42.
42% represents a degradation for me, which indicates the ideal range where alcohol and fruit aromas meet best. Here, the focus is again on a dark theme for me on the palate. So it is oriented towards flavors like sourness, dark chocolate, cocoa, etc.
For you as well, for typo, again, yes, absolutely. You have this, as you mentioned in the aroma, this combination of fruity notes, but still with chocolate tones in it. And that's great.
This is a true aging drink. When you are as young as you are, you enjoy milk chocolate. When you are our age, you prefer dark chocolate. You really have to remember that. The older you get, the more you prefer dark chocolate.
I can very well imagine a great combination with a cigar, or also with dark chocolate, or a dessert with dark chocolate.
I can imagine that, yes. So let's move on to the next product. The next product is Austrian, although it's hard to say. Lower Austria will probably be Yellow Greek, but since we also have free movement of goods within Austria, you never know if a blue Styrian Kriek has made its way to Lower Austria. But no matter what, in any case, the Krenn family operates a restaurant with a distillery there in the Ybbsviertel. This is the Ballstein view of the Gauter Gasthof. They produce excellent products, and what's nice is that they also produce excellent food. And we are now tasting the Kriecherl. We'll start with that right away. It should also have around 40%. Let's take a look right away. 41.5. Now I'm curious about the difference to yours.
So when I smell it for the first time, I smell more pluminess.
That's right.
The larger fruit, the cinnamon, which in my opinion comes more to the forefront in your product.
Yes, absolutely. Especially the cinnamon. Yes, I didn't realize it at first, but it's there. Yes, and above all, you have this multi-fruity, this plum aroma.
The cinnamon, on the other hand, suggests plums. And the Kriecherl is basically a mini plum, a small plum. But now let's check it from the taste perspective.
For me, the beauty is that the nose, similar to the first product, beautifully translates into the palate. So here too, it tends a bit more towards the fiery. What surprises me a bit is this shell-like quality, which is currently showing a bit stronger on the palate. But you already said it could be a yellow Kriecherl, and with that we would actually be back to a typicality.
But I also have a beautiful fruitiness, and if I think about it now, looking at the product, it tastes really good. It also brings a nice harmony in the finish. It has a nice density and is also quite long.
I was just about to say that it also has a certain length.
It has a perfect finish. And with all the distillates, especially those aged in wooden barrels, there is always the problem that the products are quite short. So let's try the third product, Usand. We are now taking a journey from the north, from Austria, to southern Styria. We have a family, the Schneebergers, who cultivate wine and fruit there. They also make gin on the side. And yes, gin is in. That's why it's called gin. They make gin after all. Blue damson. Let's see if this is really a blue damson, whether it's a hybrid or not. Let's smell this. It's a quirky style.
I am now confused. Yes, you mentioned the gin, and now we have wood notes in this glass. I don't know if you confirm that. So for me, this is currently even. Now the plum comes. However, almost at the beginning, there are a bit of animalistic tones. This ethereal quality is also almost found in the product.
But for me, it's really a middle ground between damson and plum, more with a bit of a rustic touch, with a slight animalistic note on top, but it is again completely its own style. However, I would describe this style as relatively unique, but let's see if the uniqueness is also on the palate.
In my opinion, there are distinct stone notes, very pronounced stone notes, also a very dark characteristic that corresponds to the blue toad. So here for me, the style is more defining of the product.
There is quite a lot of fruit.
Big fat, the product you send on the palate. To be honest, I find it even more beautiful on the palate than in taste already, because on the palate, as you said, there is something typical for a cherry, these beautiful chocolate notes, these stony tones, and I think this is very, very well executed in the product.
I also have a bit, due to the alcohol, a quite long finish, but not in terms of length, rather in volume in the mouth. The product is incredibly voluminous, so it's also very nice to drink.
Absolutely. You know, Wolfram, we just tasted 3 products that were really good. But you can always notice that there are many products on the open market and generally in the industry that stand out in the nose or so, or you talk about it. They have a heads up in a folk manner. How do I recognize the heads up? What is a heads up anyway?
Unfortunately, there is a lot of junk on the market alongside all these top products like the ones we have here, 2001, but the heads up is explained very simply. If a product is sharp, it doesn't always mean it has Vorlauf. A product can also be sharp if it has relatively high alcohol content. If a product has 70% alcohol, you have alcohol sharpness. This is not a raspberry soda, it is stronger in alcohol. But what you mean now, the Vorlauf expresses itself sensorially in Uhu acetone varnish. That is the typical Vorlauf tone. And Uhu acetone, that's also quite funny because acetone is the solvent for Uhu, hence Uhu acetone. And you have to be a little careful. There are so-called fruit esters and so-called vinegar esters. And there are distillers who produce very close to this limit. This means a lot of fruit esters is positive, is great, but if it goes too far, then it's vinegar ester, which is unfortunately negative, so not good. But don't worry about those things. At Inside World Spirits, you only have the best products. And when you come back, I would be happy to invite you anytime. You should be packed with new questions. And unfortunately, we are at the end of our format Inside World Spirits again. Andreas, Mario, I sincerely thank you for coming. I thank you for watching. And until next time, when it will be Inside World Spirits with Wolfram Ortner again.